So yeah, I guess that the question for me in thinking about approaches, methodologies and reflections is what do we need approaches and methods on women and girls' safety in parks? What do we need them to do? And I think it's fair to say after yesterday that we've got the stats. Okay, so we probably don't need any more stats. And it's really sort of interesting to compare work in different parts of the country and actually around the world. And, you know, there's not a lot of differences between the stats from different places. But I think then we need approaches and methods to do three things. And the first is I do think we need to be better at targeting and hearing from the people at the sharp end. And I said this yesterday and I'll say it again, but I think we're talking too much about women and girls without qualifying and diversifying that. We are not a homogenous group, obviously. I mean, I'm a woman, I used to be a girl. And I walk my dogs in two of Newcastle's parks every morning. And like, nothing has happened to me for years. And yet, you know, I'm somebody who goes around talking about this stuff. And there's a huge problem there, I think, in terms of representation. I think we need to refocus, particularly, I'd like us to talk much more about race and racism, but also homophobia, transphobia, ableism, and partly because those come up as really important in research on who's at risk in parks and who experiences most fear in parks. They're also rising in the UK. They're government-sponsored, actually, at the moment. Which is very worrying. But then also they're not separate to misogyny. You know, I don't think we can sort of theorise misogyny without also theorising the ways that those other things intersect. So then what methods are able to interrogate intersectionality? And yes, you know, with sensitive survey tools, we can do that to some extent, but we need more than that. And the second thing we need approaches and methods to do is go beyond the questions that we ask, and particularly thinking about that in light of that issue of our positionality. So the categories and choices that we set, and rather I think we need more research that is emergent, that is sort of telling us new things. Obviously qualitative data are very good at doing that, and I think we saw that yesterday from some of the rich qualitative data that people were presenting. And I was really struck in our study in the Northeast of the difference between what people wrote in the survey and then when we were actually in parks, stopping women and girls and saying to them, you know, how do you like it here? How often do you come here? You know, are you fearful? Where do you go? You know, and all the rest of it. And then we asked the question, well, is there one thing that would help that could be done? And it was quite telling what people say sort of straight off the bat when you ask them that. And actually quite a common thing to say was, oh, we should have a curfew on men. And then it was like, ha, 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 you know, no, more lighting, let's have some more lighting. And, you know, I'm not saying we should have a curfew on men, though I think we probably ought to have that conversation about our public spaces. But it's, you know what I mean, it's just a sign that actually I think there are things that people want to talk about that, you know, we don't necessarily frame the conversation in that way. And then the third thing I think we need approaches and methods to do is do co-production, but do, I mean, I'm using this word carefully, but do real co-production. And I don't sort of want to set up, you know, a gold standard of co-production, but obviously we know that it's not always sort of done that well. And I think it would help us do those other things, so target those at the sharp end and go beyond the questions that we ask. So I didn't on this project from the Northeast on parks, but normally my research, which is with survivors of gender-based violence, I use participatory action research, where participants work together from generating questions through data collection, analysis, and then follow-up action. And actually, speaking of gold standard, I will make an exception because I think Julia's work, and I'm hoping we'll talk about this more in a moment, is really, really great example of this and what can emerge from it. But there are also issues in doing co-production, specifically on parks, on safety in parks. And one is about contested knowledges. So there are tensions between women and girls. Again, let's not pretend that all women and girls either have the same experience or the same views. And they do clash, and particularly in parks. I think we didn't say much yesterday about age differences. You know, and older women in parks who in our research reported no experiences whatsoever of physical and sexual violence, and yet we're some, not all, were really quite judgmental about the behaviour of young women who they might see as being engaged in disorderly behaviour, or, you know, close to young men who are engaged in disorderly behaviour, but who are at high risk in parks. We know that. And it's a real issue with interventions as well. I think class is also a really important part of that. But also women and girls can be racist, can be transphobic, and there are some big issues there that we need to tackle as well. And those are obviously barriers in the action stage as well. So although a good participatory process can sort of self-empower people, and it's, I think, still the best way for groups to platform issues, I think we probably need to think about other ways of doing things as well, such as intergenerational work in parks. I think there's a lot of possibilities there, and I know some people are doing that. Second issue would be the dangers of shallow co-production. So appearing to give a different offer to communities, but actually just doing business as usual and not really changing those knowledge-power relations. And mea culpa here, because, you know, I did this research for Northumbria OPCC in 3 months because of the Safer Streets funding, and what a nightmare that was to try and engage women and girls in a meaningful way. So that short-termism in funding, I think probably everybody in the room sort of suffers from that and how it impacts our activities, certainly in universities as well. And then thirdly, how do we affect real change even if we use these methodologies? And I think there we need to sort of be looking beyond projects to the wider structures that govern knowledge production, and those obviously need to be changed. So perhaps reconfiguring long-term relationships between institutions and communities. And I think here, you know, I always think that the voluntary sector does this much better, and especially women's organisations. So I think actually have the answers to all of this, and probably, you know, just need to be asked. So structural changes to the way that research is done and who does it, I think would encourage us to ask more relevant questions as well. And just one relevant question I'd just like to throw in, because again, I don't think it was mentioned yesterday. Is the answer more reform? Is the answer more of these interventions that actually, you know, you could argue we've had a few decades now to trial and gather evidence about these interventions, and I'm not sure they really work. So are we after reformism, or do we want to sort of move more towards abolition? I'm going to leave it there.
Thank you. Thank you so much.